I think my leg's broken and Rusty just ran off." Those were the first words out of my mouth as I lay on the icy sidewalk, trying to breathe through the pain in my leg and the sheer panic pounding in my chest. The cold air stung my face, the snow still falling in lazy spirals, but it wasn't the weather that scared me. It was the sight of Rusty, my shaggy, golden retriever, disappearing into the woods, barking like his tail was on fire. I was supposed to be walking him. That was the deal. After school, I'd come home, grab his leash, and we'd hit the neighborhood loop. But it had snowed all day, and Mom said to be careful. I was careful, until I wasn't. The patch of ice near the Wilsons' driveway was hidden under a dusting of snow. One second I was upright, the next I was on the ground, pain shooting up my leg like lightning. I was 12. Not a little kid, but not big enough to just shake it off either. I knew something was wrong. I couldn't move my leg right, and even when I tried to crawl, it sent this jolt up my side that made me cry out. I kept calling Rusty, but he didn't come back. Instead, he ran off into the woods across from the Jenkins' old barn. I'd only had Rusty for 2 years, but he was my best friend. I got him the Christmas after my dad left. Mom said we needed someone who'd always stay. Rusty was that someone. He slept at the foot of my bed, knew how to high-five, and could sniff out a grilled cheese sandwich no matter where I tried to hide it. And now he was gone. I yelled his name again and again, my breath coming out in cloudy bursts. There was no one else on the street, no cars, no people shoveling. Everyone must have stayed in because of the storm. Our neighborhood was just a line of quiet houses, most of them old, with porches sagging under the weight of snow. It felt like I was the only person left in the world. Minutes passed. My leg throbbed. I kept trying to sit up, but gave up after the 4th try. Everything was fuzzy. Not from pain exactly, but from fear. I thought maybe I'd pass out. Or maybe I'd just freeze out there. I tried to call Mom, but my phone must have fallen out during the fall. I couldn't reach my pockets. Then I heard barking. I tried to lift my head. Rusty came bolting back across the road, but he wasn't alone. A man followed, bundled in a red flannel jacket and jeans, stomping through the snow with the urgency of someone chasing time. He had a thick beard, salt and pepper colored, and a red face from the cold. Rusty ran ahead, circled back, barked at him, then ran toward me again. The man caught up, looked down at me, and knelt beside me. "You all right, kid?" I shook my head, too stunned to say anything. "Dog wouldn't stop barking," he said, checking my leg without touching it. He came up to my cabin, just up the ridge there, made a racket till I followed him. Rusty sat next to me now, panting and whining, like he was trying to explain something. His tail thumped in the snow. "I think it's broken," I finally managed. "All right," the man said, calm as anything. "Name's Walt. We'll get you fixed up. I'll carry you back to my place. Phone's out. Storm took the lines, but I've got a radio, and I've got a snowmobile. Hold tight." He hoisted me up like I weighed nothing. It hurt like crazy, but he kept me steady, talking the whole way back to his cabin. Rusty led the charge, staying close, but always a few steps ahead, like he was making sure the path stayed safe. Walt's cabin wasn't far, tucked in behind a row of tall pines. It smelled like wood smoke inside, and the heat hit me like a wave. He laid me down on a faded plaid couch, wrapped me in a quilt, and got to work. He called for help on an old radio he kept on a shelf, speaking in that same even tone. Told them he had a kid with a possible leg fracture, gave directions, and said he'd keep me warm. Rusty didn't leave my side. When Walt stepped away to get some firewood or a cup of cocoa for me, Rusty stayed pressed up against the couch, his chin resting on my arm. He looked up at me like he knew exactly what had happened and exactly what needed to be done. "You've got yourself one smart dog," Walt said. I nodded, still clutching his collar. He saved me. The snow kept falling, soft and silent, but inside the cabin it felt like a bubble of warmth and safety. It took a while for the local rescue guys to get there. The roads were a mess. But when they did, they came with a stretcher and a truck with snow chains, and even a paramedic who looked just as surprised as I felt. "You're lucky, kid," one of them said. "If your dog hadn't found this man, you might have been out there all night." Mom met us at the hospital. I'll never forget her face, half crying, half laughing when she saw me wheeled in with Rusty right behind the paramedic like he was part of the team. The leg was fractured in 2 places. Nothing that wouldn't heal, but it meant a cast, crutches, and a whole lot of time off my feet. The doctors kept saying how lucky I was, how dogs don't usually do that, how most would have just stayed nearby or run home. But not Rusty. Rusty had picked a direction and found help. It wasn't until a few days later that Mom and I went back to Walt's cabin to say thank you. He was shoveling the path when we arrived, and he greeted Rusty like an old friend. I asked him how he knew Rusty wasn't just barking at nothing. "I don't know," he said, scratching Rusty's head. "It's the way he looked at me, like he was saying, 'Now come on, this is important.' So I came." From then on, Walt wasn't just some guy who lived in a cabin. He became our friend. Mom started inviting him to dinner, and he'd bring over firewood or little bags of jerky for Rusty. We learned he'd been a volunteer firefighter years ago, and he moved out to the cabin after retiring from the lumber yard. Liked the quiet, he said. Liked being useful. And somehow Rusty had known he was the one to go to. The story made the local paper. They ran a picture of me in my cast, holding Rusty's paw. The headline said, "Boy's best friend finds help just in time." But for me, it wasn't about headlines or stories. It was about that look in Rusty's eyes when I was stuck in the snow. He'd seen me hurt. He'd made a choice. And then he'd come back. With help. And that changed everything. Because even when you think you're alone, even when the world is cold and quiet and nobody's around, sometimes a scruffy golden retriever with too much fur and the biggest heart in the world will do something you never saw coming. And that's just the beginning. Rusty never let me out of his sight after that day. If I went to the bathroom, he waited outside the door. If I crutched my way to the fridge, he walked beside me, his steps slow and careful, like he understood that I couldn't move the way I used to. Even when I was asleep, I'd wake up sometimes and feel the warm weight of his body at the foot of my bed, or his shaggy head resting on my arm. It had been a week since the fall. The cast on my leg went all the way up past my knee, and every inch of it itched like crazy. But I didn't complain much. I had it better than most. I had Rusty, and now I had Walt, too. Mom had invited Walt over again that Friday. She made her famous chili, the one with cornbread muffins and honey butter, and Walt brought his harmonica. Said he used to play in a band when he was younger. He sat on the couch and played a few tunes while Rusty sat in front of him, head tilted like he was trying to remember the melody. "You're not half bad," Mom told Walt as she cleared the table. Walt chuckled. "I'm better with a chainsaw than a harmonica, but I appreciate it." The room felt warmer than usual, not just from the fireplace or the cooking, but from the way Walt filled it. He was easy to talk to, and he listened like whatever you said really mattered. It made things feel less empty. Since Dad left, the house had felt bigger, somehow colder, but Walt's laugh pushed all that back like sunlight through a frosted window. After dinner, he asked if I wanted to see where Rusty had found him. Mom hesitated, but Walt promised he'd be careful. I got bundled up, slid into my coat, and crutched out to his truck, while Rusty bounced alongside like he'd won a prize. We drove up past the Jenkins barn, across the narrow gravel road that curved around the ridge, and stopped in front of a trail that led into the woods. Walt helped me down and pointed. "Right up there," he said. "About a quarter-mile in. That's where he found me." He didn't have to say more. I could imagine Rusty plowing through the snow, barking his heart out, and Walt looking up from whatever he was doing and realizing something was wrong. The thought gave me chills. Rusty ran a short circle around us, then sat by my side. "He was real determined," Walt said. "Wouldn't take no for an answer." I looked at Rusty and grinned. "He's not great at no. He once dragged a whole bag of dog food across the kitchen because I told him dinner was in 10 minutes. Walt laughed, then clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You're lucky. He's got more sense than most people." We headed back to the truck, the sky turning pink over the trees. I was quiet on the ride home, thinking about how close things had come to going the other way. What if Walt hadn't been home? What if Rusty had gotten turned around? I didn't say it out loud, but I felt it in my chest. Like I'd been given a second chance, and I didn't even know what to do with it yet. The next morning, I was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching Rusty dig at the snowbank near our mailbox. He loved the snow. Rolled in it, buried his face in it, treated it like his personal playground. A delivery truck pulled up, and the driver stepped out with a package. Rusty barked once, then wagged his tail like he recognized the guy. "Hey there, hero," the driver said, giving Rusty a pat. "Heard you saved your boy's life. That true?" I smiled, reaching for the package. It was from my aunt in Nebraska. Some books, a model car kit, and a handwritten card with way too many smiley faces. Word had gotten around. That week, 3 different neighbors stopped by to drop off things for Rusty. A box of treats from the Hendersons, a handmade bandana from the girl across the street. Even Mr. Kepler, the grumpy man who always yelled when we walked on his lawn, brought over a tennis ball and said, "He's all right, that dog." Mom started keeping a basket in the living room just for Rusty's things. She said he earned it. A few days later, something strange happened. It started when Rusty wouldn't stop scratching at the back door. He usually waited until I was ready, but that morning he was pacing, whining, pawing the doorknob like it owed him money. "What's gotten into you?" I asked. He barked once, then twice more, then took off the moment I opened the door. I tried to follow, hobbling as fast as my crutches would let me, but by the time I reached the fence, he was already halfway down the road, sprinting like he had somewhere to be. Walt's truck appeared a few minutes later, roaring down the street and skidding to a stop in front of me. "Saw him running," Walt said. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, but something's up." We followed the path Rusty had taken. It led us to the old water tower at the edge of town. A place kids dared each other to climb in the summer, but this time of year it was just a frozen patch of weeds and rust. Rusty was circling something in the snow. It was a small box. Wooden, like a chest, half buried beneath a tarp and some brush. Walt got there first, crouched, and lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of papers. Old letters, water-damaged but legible. On top sat a photograph. That's my brother," Walt whispered, picking it up. "I thought I lost this years ago. How did your dog—" He trailed off, eyes still on the photo. We didn't find out who left the box there, or why Rusty had been so drawn to it, but Walt took it home, holding it like it weighed more than anything else in the world. After that, it became a kind of thing. Rusty started finding stuff. A scarf lost by a neighbor weeks ago, a missing phone from the library, even a kitten that had crawled under a car hood and couldn't get out. Rusty barked until the owner came out and opened the hood, and there it was, tiny, shivering, but alive. Mom joked we should open a detective agency. Rusty and me, mystery solvers. I laughed, but there was something different about it now. It wasn't just luck. Rusty seemed to know. Walt started visiting more. He helped me with my homework, showed me how to whittle wood, which I was terrible at, and brought over books he thought I'd like. We even started building a birdhouse together. My cast didn't stop me from using a screwdriver, even if I had to sit sideways on a stool to get it done. One night, we were sitting around the fire, Rusty curled up at my feet, and Walt said, "You know, some dogs are special, real special, not just smart, tuned in, like they see the world a little deeper than we do." I looked down at Rusty. His ears twitched in his sleep. "Maybe he's one of those," I said. Walt nodded. "Maybe." That winter stretched on longer than usual. More snow, more nights curled up in blankets, more stories shared around the fire. I got better on my crutches. Rusty never let me fall, not once. Then came the storm. It started like any other snow, light flakes, soft wind, but by midnight the power flickered, then died. The wind howled. Trees bent. The news said it was the worst blizzard in 20 years. Mom kept the fireplace going, pulled out candles, and made hot cocoa on a camping stove. Walt checked in by radio, said he'd stay put unless we needed help. That night, I woke up to Rusty barking. Not normal barking, urgent, sharp, the kind that makes your heart jump. Mom ran in. "What's wrong with him?" I grabbed my crutches, followed Rusty to the front window. He was pawing at the glass, barking louder now. We looked outside. A dark shape moved in the snow, then another. 2 figures, stumbling through the blizzard. I couldn't tell who they were. Mom threw on her coat, ran to the porch. Rusty bolted past her, straight into the storm. The figures collapsed not far from our steps. One of them lifted a hand. A man's voice called out faintly, "Help!" Rusty reached them first. Mom and I made it seconds later. Walt had arrived too, somehow beating the wind and snow in his truck. The 2 people were hikers. Lost. Their car had spun out on the back road. They'd been walking for miles. We pulled them inside, got them warm, called for help on the radio. Later, the rescue team said they never would have made it if Rusty hadn't heard them, hadn't known to bark, hadn't gotten us moving. As they left, one of the men bent down, scratched Rusty behind the ears, and whispered, "You're something else, aren't you?" I didn't say anything. I just nodded, because he was. And I had a feeling he wasn't done yet. By February, I'd memorized every crack in the ceiling above my bed. Recovery was slow, and the cast was still on, though the doctor said I'd be moving to a boot soon. Rusty had learned to recognize the sound of my crutches and would spring to his feet every time he heard them, wagging like we were about to head off on some great adventure. We weren't. Most days were the same. Get up, awkwardly crutch to the kitchen, try not to fall over while pouring cereal, and hope Rusty didn't trip me in his excitement. Then a couple hours of schoolwork. My teachers had sent home packets and videos, and long afternoons of staring out the window at snow that refused to melt. Rusty filled in the blank spaces. He'd nudge my hand when I got frustrated with algebra, drop a ball at my feet when I looked too tired, and curl up with me whenever I hit the couch. But something had changed in him. Ever since he led us to those hikers during the storm, Rusty had become more alert, more focused. He still acted like a goofball most of the time, but there were moments, real moments, where it felt like he was listening to something only he could hear. The 3rd time it happened was a Tuesday. I was sitting on the porch again, watching the mailman try not to slide down our iced-over front steps when Rusty stiffened. His ears perked up, his nose lifted, and he gave a low whine. Then, without warning, he took off across the yard, barking once, then again. "Rusty!" I called, already trying to get to my crutches. Mom came out just as I reached the driveway. "He went toward the Miller's place," I said, breath coming fast. Mom grabbed her coat. "Get in the truck." The Miller's house was a few blocks away. Older couple, kept to themselves, always left little peanut butter dog bones in their mailbox for Rusty. He loved them. We found him at their back porch, barking like crazy. Mrs. Miller was lying in the snow. She'd slipped while feeding the birds. Hit her head. Hadn't moved. Mom called 911 while I sat beside Rusty, who stayed pressed against Mrs. Miller, licking her hand until she groaned softly. "Is she going to be okay?" I asked when the ambulance came. "They think so," Mom said. "If she'd been out here much longer, though." The paramedics loaded her up and thanked us. One of them looked down at Rusty, gave a low whistle, and said, "This dog deserves a medal." Mom drove us home, quiet the whole way. That night, she sat me down at the table. "You know," she said, folding her hands, "there's a program not far from here. A training center for service dogs, therapy animals. They take dogs with strong instincts, good temperament, train them to help people. What if Rusty—" "No," I said, too fast. "He's mine." Her face softened. "I'm not saying give him away. They have weekend classes. You and Rusty could do them together. Just something to think about." I didn't answer, but I didn't stop thinking about it either. That weekend, Walt took me and Rusty out for our first real walk since the accident. I had the boot on now, and while I couldn't run or anything, I could walk with just one crutch and Walt's steady hand. We followed the trail behind Walt's cabin, where the snow was starting to melt into slushy patches. The trees were bare, their branches coated in ice, catching sunlight like glass. Rusty trotted ahead, nose to the ground. "So," Walt said, kicking a pine cone. "Your mom mentioned the program." "Yeah." "Sounds like he's already halfway trained," Walt said, watching Rusty. "Most dogs wouldn't notice what he notices." I sighed. But what if it changes him? What if he turns into one of those perfect, quiet dogs that never plays fetch or does anything fun? Walt laughed. "Kid, you could send that dog to the moon and he'd still come back with a tennis ball in his mouth." We walked a little more in silence. Then Walt said, "He might help more people, like he helped you, like he helped Mrs. Miller. Think about that." I did, all the way home. The next week, we visited the training center. It was in a big red barn with a fenced field and a wide gravel parking lot. Inside, it smelled like dog treats and pine cleaner. A tall man with a bushy mustache named Frank introduced himself and led us around. Rusty passed the initial temperament test in under 10 minutes. Sat on command, didn't bark at the other dogs, even performed a perfect stay while another dog tried to lick his face. "He's sharp," Frank said, watching Rusty. "Really sharp, and loyal, too. That's a winning combo." They gave us a schedule for weekend sessions. Saturday mornings, 2 hours each. Basic training, response cues, therapy tasks. I agreed, even though a part of me worried I was opening a door I couldn't close. The first class was chaos. Dogs barking, tails wagging, leashes tangling. Rusty was a natural. Focused, calm, responsive. I was the one fumbling with hand signals and forgetting which pocket had the treats. By week 3, we were the top of the class. One Saturday, after practice, a woman named Ellen approached us. She was short, wore thick glasses, and had a little boy with her, maybe 7 or 8, thin, with a shock of blonde hair and nervous eyes. "Would you mind?" she asked, gesturing to Rusty. I nodded, stepping aside. Rusty sat patiently as the boy approached, then slowly reached out to touch his head. The boy smiled. Just a small one. But it was something. Ellen looked like she might cry. "He hasn't spoken since October." Not a word. But he asked if he could meet your dog. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Rusty had done something, again, that I couldn't explain. Reached someone no one else could reach. At the next class, Frank pulled me aside. "There's a special certification we offer," he said, "for dogs with Rusty's abilities. Search and response, therapy visits. Not every dog gets invited." I looked at Rusty, who was currently rolling on his back, all 4 legs in the air. "He doesn't look very special right now." Frank grinned. "He is?" I told Mom about it that night. She listened quietly, then nodded. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." So we did it. We signed up for the extended program. It meant more sessions, more tests. But Rusty rose to every challenge. He learned how to respond to seizure cues, detect certain sounds, even lead someone to a specific location using voice commands. We also started going on community visits. Hospitals, schools, even the firehouse. Rusty became a local legend. People started calling him the Miracle Dog. I didn't love the name, because to me he was still just Rusty, the same goofy pup who used to eat my socks and dig holes in the backyard. But I understood what they meant. He was a miracle, just not in the way people thought. He didn't magically heal wounds or speak in barks that translated into words, but he knew things, felt them, responded in ways that made people feel seen, heard, safe, like he knew exactly what you needed, even before you did. One night, we were walking home from the training center. Snow was starting to fall again, soft flakes dancing in the streetlights. I was tired, dragging my boot a little more than usual, but Rusty stayed close, never pulling. "You know," I said, looking at him, "we're not done, are we?" He wagged once, because we weren't, and deep down I knew something bigger was still coming. Spring came late that year. The snow took its time melting, hanging around like it didn't want to say goodbye. I still had the boot, but I could walk better now. No more crutches, just a little wobble if I stood too long. Rusty stuck to me like glue, though, to be fair, he always had. Now it just felt more official, like we were partners. Every Saturday, we kept going to the training center. Frank said we were almost ready for the final certification. Rusty would be tested in different settings, unfamiliar buildings, noisy crowds, simulated emergencies. If he passed, we'd be allowed to respond to real calls in town. I wasn't nervous, but I wasn't exactly calm either. Rusty always knew what to do. I was the one who had to keep up. Mom and Walt both came to watch the first big test. It took place at the local community center, where they'd set up a series of rooms and distractions, kids yelling, doors slamming, even recorded sirens. Rusty didn't flinch. When it came time for him to find a lost item, he sniffed it out in less than a minute. During the emergency cue test, where a volunteer pretended to be hurt behind a closed door, Rusty barked, pawed the knob, and looked right at me. He passed everything. On the first try. Frank shook my hand when it was over. "He's ready. And so are you." After that, things moved quickly. We got our vests. Mine said handler, his said certified search and response dog. Rusty looked proud wearing it, like he knew it meant something important. Maybe he did. We started small. Community patrols during big events, booths at local schools, a few calls here and there when someone misplaced a child at the grocery store or a pet ran off into the woods. Rusty was always the calmest one in the room. But the call that changed everything came on a Wednesday. It was late afternoon. I was in the kitchen, trying to make a peanut butter sandwich while Rusty kept a suspicious eye on the jar. The radio crackled from the shelf above the fridge, and a voice came through. Sharp and fast. "This is dispatch. We've got a missing person. 11-year-old male, last seen near Willow Creek Trailhead. Parents report he wandered off during a hike, hasn't been seen in over an hour. Requesting certified response team. Mom turned from the sink, her face pale. I'd never heard a call like that before. I looked at Rusty. He was already standing by the door. We were in the truck in under 10 minutes. Walt met us at the trailhead, already geared up with a flashlight, a map, and his old hiking pack. A couple of sheriff's deputies were on site, plus a pair of park rangers. They gave us the boy's name, Evan, and a photo. His parents were off to the side, speaking to a deputy. The mom had her face buried in her hands. The dad just kept pacing. I knelt next to Rusty. You ready? His tail gave one slow wag. They gave us a scarf Evan had been wearing earlier. I held it out to Rusty, who sniffed it carefully, then looked off toward the trees. The wind was picking up. The sun had started to dip below the tree line, and the trail ahead looked long and endless. But Rusty didn't hesitate. He started forward, nose low, feet sure. We followed. Every 20 steps, I'd call out Evan's name. Walt moved beside me, watching the trees, flashlight off for now, but ready. About a half-mile in, Rusty veered left, off the main trail and into a denser part of the woods. We didn't question it. We followed his lead. The ground was rough, muddy patches, brambles, even a creek we had to cross on foot. I slipped once, catching myself on a tree trunk, but Rusty just kept moving. Then he stopped. He barked twice, sharp and focused. I hurried to his side. There, nestled between two rocks under a low outcrop, was a small figure. Evan. Huddled in a jacket, shivering, eyes wide. "He's here!" I yelled. Walt knelt beside the boy, checking him over. He's cold, but conscious. Evan looked at Rusty and smiled faintly. "Dog found me." "Yeah," I said. "He does that?" We radioed in and waited for the medics to arrive. Rusty stayed beside Evan the whole time, his body curved around him like a blanket. Evan's mom cried when we carried him out. She hugged me, hugged Rusty, said thank you over and over until the words started to lose shape. That night we got home late. I made Rusty a grilled chicken breast and let him have the whole thing. He ate it in 3 bites, then flopped down on the rug with a satisfied grunt. I sat next to him. "I didn't even know we were going to do that this year," I said. "Help someone like that, for real." He licked my hand. The weeks that followed brought more calls. People started asking for Rusty by name. He visited nursing homes, helped calm kids during fire drills, even led a search for a missing cat who'd gotten stuck in a storm drain. They found her. She hissed at Rusty, and he just wagged like she'd paid him a compliment. And then came the visit to the children's hospital. That one stuck with me more than any other. We were scheduled to visit the pediatric ward on a Friday afternoon. Rusty was freshly brushed, his vest clean, and we brought a backpack full of tennis balls, coloring books, and a pack of bubble gum for the nurses. The moment we walked in, Rusty seemed to shift. His ears perked, his gait slowed, like he knew exactly where we were. Room after room, he let kids pet him, poke him, even tug on his ears. He never flinched, just stayed calm, wagging gently, sometimes resting his chin on a bed or nudging a hand that had fallen asleep. But it was the last room that mattered most. A boy named Tyler, maybe 10 years old. Bald from chemo, pale, thin. He didn't speak when we entered, just watched from his bed with eyes that had seen too much. Rusty walked over slowly, sat down, waited. A minute passed, then 2, and then Tyler whispered, "Can he sit with me?" I helped Rusty up onto the bed. Tyler reached out, placed a hand on his head, and sighed. Later, a nurse told us Tyler hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Rusty lay beside him for nearly an hour. I sat in a chair, watching them both. The boy had his hand buried in Rusty's fur, and every so often he'd smile. Just a little. Just enough. When we left, the nurse followed us out. "I don't know how he does it," she said. I didn't either, not really. But I was grateful he did. The day after the hospital visit, we got a letter in the mail. From Evan's parents. A thank you card with a photo of Evan holding a sign that said, "I'm okay," and Rusty's name drawn in bubble letters across the top. Inside the card, the mom had written, "We don't know how to repay you, but we will never forget what you did." I taped the card to the fridge. Mom bought Rusty a new collar. Walt brought him a deer antler chew toy that he insisted came from the biggest buck he'd ever seen. Rusty didn't care. He still slept on the same corner of my bed, still barked at the trash truck, still rolled in every muddy patch he could find. But every time he saw the vest, he stood straighter. He knew. And somewhere deep down, so did I. We were just getting started. Rusty's face was in the newspaper again. A full-color picture this time, right there above the fold. Me kneeling next to him, holding his leash with one hand and his new patch with the other. Certified Search and Response. The headline read, "From Ice to Impact. Local dog becomes town hero." Mom clipped the article and pinned it to the corkboard in the kitchen, just beneath a flyer for Walt's firewood business and my old spelling bee certificate from 4th grade. She said she was building a wall of fame, but really it was Rusty's wall. I was just along for the ride. Even Principal Brenner at school made an announcement about him over the intercom. "Let's all give a round of applause for one of our students and his very good dog, who helped rescue a missing hiker last week." My face turned red the second the lunchroom broke into clapping. Rusty wasn't there, of course, but I knew he'd have barked happily if he heard it. After school, Walt picked me up in his truck. We were headed to a local wildlife reserve where Rusty had been invited for a special demonstration. A ranger named Doug wanted to observe his tracking skills, just in case they needed a canine response team in the future. Rusty stuck his head out the window the whole way there, ears flapping in the wind like little flags of joy. I watched him from the passenger seat and shook my head. "You know he's going to act like it's a game," I said. Walt grinned. "Far as I'm concerned, everything is a game to that dog. He just wins them all." The reserve was huge. Miles of trails, brush, and open fields dotted with old log benches and bird-watching towers. Doug met us near the front gate, along with a couple of volunteers and another dog handler named Teresa, who had a black lab named Moxie. "Let's see what your boy's got," Doug said, tossing me a rolled-up glove. "Hide this somewhere along the west trail. We'll wait 5 minutes and then send him in." I walked half a mile down the path, tucked the glove under a log, and made my way back. Rusty was already alert by the time I returned, his whole body humming with energy. "You ready, Rust?" He barked once, tail high. Doug gave the signal, and I gave Rusty the cue. "Find it." Off he went. Low to the ground, nose twitching, weaving along the path like a heat-seeking missile. Moxie followed a different trail with Teresa. It wasn't a competition, but I couldn't help rooting for Rusty like it was. He found the glove in just over 4 minutes, sat next to it proudly, tongue lolling out like he'd just discovered buried treasure. Doug whistled. "That's impressive." Moxie returned 10 minutes later with Teresa, also successful, but covered in burrs and leaves. Rusty, somehow, was spotless. We spent another hour going through different drills: reaction to strangers, recall commands, noise distractions. Rusty passed everything with the same calm focus he always had. On the way back to the truck, Doug walked beside me. He's got something special. Not just obedience, awareness. You can't teach that part. I didn't say anything, just scratched Rusty behind the ears. That night, back at home, Mom had lasagna in the oven and a stack of mail on the table. She handed me an envelope with no return address. Inside was a note written in tight handwriting. Dear Rusty and Handler, I don't know how to thank you. My daughter saw you at the hospital last month. She was the one who asked if the dog could sit on the bed. That night she spoke to me for the first time in weeks. Just said, "The dog understands." It was all I needed to hear. Thank you. Please give him a treat for me. There was no name, just that message, and a $20 bill. I read it twice, then a third time, before passing it to Mom. Rusty came over and sat at my feet like he knew what I'd read. You want that treat now? I asked. He licked my hand. We used the money to buy him a giant peanut butter bone from the pet store. He carried it around for half an hour before actually chewing it, like he wanted to make sure the moment lasted. More letters came after that. Sometimes it was an email to the training center, sometimes a card left in our mailbox. People wrote about moments I didn't even know had happened, how Rusty had calmed their child during a tantrum, or made a lonely man at the nursing home laugh for the first time in months. And then one day, the mayor's office called. They were organizing a spring fair at the town park and asked if Rusty could be part of the opening ceremony. There'd be a little parade, some booths, and a community appreciation segment. They even wanted to give him a special medal. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Rusty didn't care about medals. He cared about sticks and belly rubs and chasing squirrels that he'd never actually catch. But we said yes. The day of the fair was bright and sunny, one of the first truly warm days in weeks. Rusty wore his vest, though I left it unzipped so he could breathe easier. Mom made him a bow tie, which he hated, but tolerated for the photos. Hundreds of people came. Kids ran through obstacle courses. Grown-ups huddled around food trucks. Music played from speakers strung up in the trees. And everywhere we went, people called out Rusty's name. He stopped for every single person who wanted to pet him. During the ceremony, the mayor handed me a certificate with both our names on it, and then knelt to place a medallion around Rusty's neck. He tried to eat it at first. The crowd laughed. When it was over, Walt found us near the lemonade stand and said, "So, what's next, champ?" I shrugged. "Not sure, but Rusty'll tell me." And then something strange happened. A boy wandered up. Small, maybe 6, with a wide face and dark eyes. He didn't say anything. Just stood in front of Rusty and stared. Rusty stared back. The boy reached out, placed a hand on Rusty's head, and whispered something. I didn't hear it, but I saw his lips move. Then he turned and walked away. I looked around, but no adult followed him. No one seemed to notice he was even there. Walt raised an eyebrow. "You see his parents?" "No," I said slowly. "Do you think—" We followed where the boy had gone. He disappeared near the craft booths, and for a second, I thought maybe I imagined the whole thing. Then Rusty pulled at the leash. We wound through the booths and past the playground, where a woman stood near the swings, panicked, talking to a police officer. "My son," she said, clutching a photo. "He was just here." I turned around for a second. He was gone. I showed her my phone, snapped a picture of the boy I'd just seen. She gasped. "That's him?" We retraced our steps. Rusty sniffed, barked once, and led us toward the edge of the pond at the far end of the park. The boy was there, sitting on a bench, completely calm. His mom ran to him, sobbing, and the officer thanked us over and over. But I couldn't stop thinking about the whisper, about how Rusty had stood so still, listened so closely. That night, I asked him what the boy had said. He didn't answer, of course, just rested his head on my knee and sighed. But I didn't need to hear the words, because whatever they were, they mattered. And Rusty had understood. The Monday after the fair, life tried to go back to normal, but it didn't quite succeed. Everywhere we went, someone had something to say about Rusty. At the grocery store, Mrs. Penwell stopped us in the baking aisle just to ask if he could help her find her lost spice rack. At the post office, the clerk leaned over the counter to tell me her nephew in Chicago had seen Rusty's story online. It felt like Rusty had gone from neighborhood dog to local legend overnight. But if you asked him, he didn't seem any different. He still woke me up by breathing in my face every morning, still refused to drink water unless it came from the blue bowl by the kitchen door, and still barked at the garbage truck with the same wild urgency, like it was the most serious threat our house had ever faced. Still, something about him had shifted. He watched things more closely now. Birds on the power line, joggers going past, even squirrels, though he no longer chased them. It was like he was constantly evaluating, scanning, reading things I couldn't see. School was winding down for the year. I'd finally ditched the boot for good and was back to walking like a normal person, which meant Rusty could pull me along at full speed again. We started running together in the mornings. Well, I ran, and he bounded beside me like his legs were springs. Walt said it was good for both of us. "Keeps your heart strong," he said, handing me a bottle of water one morning after a 3-mile loop. "And he likes having a job. You can tell." And he was right. Rusty thrived when he had a task. Whether it was tracking a glove, comforting a scared kid, or just being the first to greet visitors at the front door, he came alive when there was a purpose. One Thursday evening, just before dinner, we got a call from Frank at the training center. He asked if we'd be available that weekend for something special. "There's a veterans center upstate," he said. "They're holding a family day and want to introduce a few service animals to the residents and their families. You and Rusty came to mind first." "Of course," I said, without even asking Mom. I already knew she'd say yes. The drive took about an hour. Walt came with us, saying something about how he hadn't seen that part of the state since he was a teenager. The center sat on a wide stretch of green hills, with a red brick building surrounded by walking paths, picnic benches, and little flags fluttering from every lamppost. We arrived early, and Rusty hopped out of the truck like he owned the place. A volunteer named Greg showed us around and introduced us to some of the other handlers and dogs. There was a golden doodle named Macy, who wore pink booties on all 4 paws, and a shepherd mix named Duke, who was so calm he almost looked asleep the whole time. Rusty, as usual, found his rhythm instantly. He went from person to person, greeting everyone gently, laying his head on laps, letting children hug him, and staying beside the ones who didn't want to talk. He had a way of sensing who needed space and who didn't. One man, seated by the garden in a wheelchair, watched Rusty silently. He had a faded cap on his head and deep lines around his eyes. He didn't reach out, didn't smile. But Rusty walked right up and sat down beside him. Didn't nudge, didn't lick, didn't make a sound. Minutes passed. Then the man spoke. "I had one like him, back in '68. Rusty looked up at him. "Name was Trooper," the man went on. "Saved my life once. Pulled me out of a creek when I couldn't move. Dogs like that, they don't come around too often." He reached out slowly and touched Rusty's head. "Feels the same," he whispered. Greg came over later, eyes a little wet. "He hasn't talked much since he got here," he said. "That was the most he's said to anyone in weeks." Rusty just yawned. The rest of the day passed in a blur of handshakes, pictures, and stories. One woman gave me a bracelet she'd made from old military tags. "For Rusty," she said. "He's a soldier in his own right." I kept it in my pocket the whole ride home. That night, I lay awake, watching Rusty curled up at the foot of my bed. I thought about Trooper, about all the stories Rusty had now become part of. It was like he'd been gathering pieces of people, carrying them forward so they wouldn't be forgotten. The next week, school let out. Summer vacation. No more packets, no more alarms, just long sunny days and open skies. We spent most of it outside. Morning runs, trips to the lake, short hikes with Walt, and visits to the training center when Frank needed help with new dogs. Rusty had unofficially become a mentor for some of the younger trainees. They followed him around, tried to mimic his calm energy, and looked to him when they weren't sure what to do. And Rusty always waited, always showed them. Frank said it was like watching a master craftsman pass down his tools. About halfway through July, something new came up. A woman named Judy reached out. She ran a summer camp for kids with sensory and emotional challenges, ones who struggled with loud noises, new environments, or big groups. She asked if Rusty could come for a few hours one day and just be there. "He doesn't have to do tricks," she said. "Just exist. Sometimes that's enough." So we went. It was a quiet camp. No shouting, no whistles. Everything was soft, gentle. The kids moved at their own pace, some with headphones, some with weighted vests, some barely speaking at all. Rusty fit right in. He let kids bury their faces in his fur. Let one boy trace the outline of his paw for 15 minutes straight. Another girl held his leash the entire time we walked around the property, not saying a word, but humming softly like the two of them shared a secret song. Afterward, Judy hugged me. "You don't know what you brought today." But I think I did. Later that week, a storm hit. Not the thunder kind, the emergency kind. A large apartment complex in a neighboring town caught fire. Electrical issue. Dozens displaced. The community center became a shelter. And Frank called us again. "We've got scared kids, overwhelmed parents. Can you come?" We arrived that evening. The center was loud, people talking, phones ringing, kids crying. Rusty stepped in, and it was like someone turned down the volume. He moved carefully, sat next to a toddler clinging to a blanket, nudged a man pacing back and forth until he sat down. A volunteer gave me a grateful look. Even just seeing him makes people feel better. The night was long. Families settled in on cots. Volunteers passed out food. Rusty made his rounds, and finally curled up next to an elderly woman who said she hadn't slept in 2 days. She dozed off in 10 minutes, snoring lightly, her hand resting on Rusty's back. On the drive home, I leaned my head against the window. "You think he ever gets tired?" I asked Walt. "Sure he does," Walt said. "But it's a different kind of tired. The kind that feels right." I looked at Rusty in the back seat. His eyes were closed, but his ears still twitched. A week later, Mom took us to the vet for Rusty's annual checkup. Dr. Green was a tall woman with kind eyes and a gentle touch. She'd known Rusty since we got him. "He looks fantastic," she said after the exam. "Strong heart, clear eyes. He's in his prime. Just keep doing what you're doing." Outside the office, I knelt beside him. "You hear that? Prime. That means we're just getting started," he wagged. As we walked back to the truck, a little girl in the parking lot stopped and stared. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the miracle dog." I turned. She was holding her mom's hand. The mom smiled. "We saw the article about the park. Thank you for what you do." Rusty stepped forward, lowered his head slightly so the girl could pet him. She reached out with both hands. "Can he stay with us?" she asked. Her mom laughed. "No, sweetie. He has his own boy." The girl looked at me. "You're lucky." I nodded. "I know." And I did. Because even after all the rescues, all the visits, all the quiet miracles, he was still mine. And the best part was, he always would be. By the time August rolled in, Rusty had racked up more appearances than some local celebrities. The town's community board even created a page on their website titled Rusty's Trail, where people could post photos and stories of moments they'd shared with him. Encounters at the grocery store, from school visits, or when he showed up at a park event and laid beside someone who hadn't smiled in days. Every week, a few new stories popped up, always ending with some version of the same line. He just knew. What surprised me most wasn't how many people had those stories, but how many didn't even know each other. He was stitching our town together without anyone realizing it. One gentle nudge, one calm stare, one miracle at a time. We started getting letters from places we'd never been. A woman from Texas wrote to say her sister in town had told her about Rusty, and it reminded her of a golden retriever she lost years ago. A man from Vermont sent a photo of his family dog with a short message that said, "Tell Rusty I hope he knows he's inspiring the rest of us." I showed them all to Mom. She smiled, teared up at a few, and started putting them into a binder. "It's his story too," she said, slipping another letter into a clear sleeve. Every life he touches adds a page. One Tuesday morning, Frank called again. "Need you and Rusty for something different," he said. "It's not a rescue, not an emergency, just something that might matter more than either of those." That Saturday, we drove to the edge of the next county, where a summer youth program for boys had asked for a canine visit. Frank had sent some of his other trainers before, but this time the director specifically asked for Rusty. "Some of these kids," Frank explained on the way, "they've had tough breaks. Foster system, trauma, you name it. They're not always open to people. But a dog, that's different." The facility was simple. Long buildings with dorm rooms, a big dining hall, and a field that stretched toward the woods. We pulled up just after lunch. A few kids were tossing a football, others sat under a tree, listening to music through shared earbuds. Rusty hopped out of the truck, shook himself off, and looked around. A staff member came over and introduced himself as Leo, then waved us toward the main gathering space. "Just let him be himself," Leo said. "The kids'll come if they're ready." And they did. Not all at once, not with excitement, but in that slow, cautious way someone reaches out after a long time of holding in. Rusty lay on the grass and waited. The first boy came forward, said nothing, just sat down beside him. Then another, then two more. One of them asked if Rusty knew how to do tricks. I showed him a few. Sit, shake, high five. They laughed when he rolled onto his back dramatically, after I whispered, "Play dead." A kid named Ty asked if Rusty ever got scared. "Sure," I said. "He barks at the vacuum, and once a squirrel threw an acorn at him, and he didn't go near that tree for 2 weeks." They laughed harder at that, and one of the boys whispered something to another. A minute later, Rusty was sitting between them both, heads tilted as they tried to teach him a new command they made up on the spot. By the time we left, every single kid had petted him. Some hugged him. One gave him a bead bracelet with mismatched letters that spelled hero. Leo shook my hand. Whatever it is he's got, it's powerful and rare. On the drive home, Rusty rested his head in my lap. "Maybe you're the one who rescued me," I said quietly. "And I didn't even know I needed it." August kept moving. The weather grew hotter, the sky clearer, the days longer. With school approaching, I thought maybe things would slow down, that Rusty and I would get a little quiet before everything picked up again. But life had other plans. It started with a knock on our door just after dinner one night. A woman stood there, mid-30s, nervous, clutching her purse like it might disappear. Her name was Marcy. She introduced herself, and then asked if this was the house with the golden retriever who found the little boy in the woods. "That's us," I said, pointing to where Rusty was sprawled in the hallway, licking peanut butter off a spoon. She stepped inside. Her eyes were glassy. "I have a brother, lives in a group home about an hour away. He doesn't talk much, barely leaves his room. But last week, someone at the home printed out a picture of your dog and left it on the bulletin board." She pulled out a folded sheet of paper and held it out. It was the newspaper photo again. Me and Rusty, both squinting into the sun. He hasn't stopped staring at it. He even said something. "Dog like Jack." Jack was our childhood dog. First time I've heard him mention Jack since we were teenagers. Marcy hesitated, then asked, "Would you be willing to visit?" We set a date for that weekend. The group home was quiet, clean. One of those places where time seems to slow down. Her brother's name was Alan. He was in a common room, sitting by the window, the photo still pinned to the wall behind him. When Rusty walked in, Alan looked up. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes tracked every movement. Rusty stopped 3 feet away, sat, and waited. Alan lifted one hand, just slightly. Rusty stepped closer. Alan said, "Jack, then, come here." Rusty walked over, leaned against his legs, and let him pet him. Marcy cried. We stayed for 2 hours. Alan never said much, but his hand never left Rusty's head. On the way out, the staff asked if we'd consider coming back regularly. Mom said we would. By mid-August, Rusty was doing more than I ever imagined possible. He'd become more than a helper, more than a miracle. He was a bridge between past and present, between silence and voice, between fear and comfort. One morning, I got a message from Frank. He wanted to nominate Rusty for a state-level community service recognition. "They usually give it to humans," he said, "but I think we can make a case." I didn't even have to think about it. A week later, a film crew came to town. Someone at the local news station had pitched a short documentary about therapy and service animals. They'd heard about Rusty and wanted to include him. At first, it was weird, being followed around by cameras, asked to repeat what I said, told to stand in a better light. But Rusty handled it better than I did. He barely blinked, acted like they weren't even there. During one interview, they asked what I thought made Rusty so special. I looked down at him and said, "He listens, that's all, really listens. And most people don't get that kind of attention from anyone." When the documentary aired a month later, it included clips of our visits, interviews with Frank, Walt, and even Principal Brenner. They showed Rusty lying beside kids, walking through hospital halls, and leading that search in the woods. The final shot was a close-up of Rusty's face, eyes steady, calm, and then a title screen, "Listening Dog, The Story of Rusty." We didn't expect what happened next. Emails flooded in, offers to speak at schools, libraries, even a conference for child development therapists. People asked to fly us out, asked to send gifts, asked if they could clone him. We said no to most of it, said yes to a few. But mostly we kept doing what we'd been doing. Rusty didn't care about attention. He cared about presence. And that never changed. Later that week, as we sat on the porch and watched the last of summer slip away in golden light, Walt leaned forward and said, "You know, I've lived a long time, seen a lot, but I've never seen anything like that dog." Neither had I, and I had a feeling the world hadn't either. The first day of school snuck up on me like a surprise thunderstorm. One minute I was sleeping in and spending all afternoon with Rusty. The next I was back at my desk, shuffling papers, and trying to remember my locker combo. Everyone wanted to talk about the documentary. I couldn't go 3 feet without someone saying, "Hey, I saw you and Rusty on TV," or "Was it weird having cameras follow you around?" But it never felt like the attention was about me. It was always Rusty, and he wasn't there to soak it in. He was at home, probably asleep in a sunbeam, or chewing through the last inch of that ridiculous antler Walt gave him. Frank called a few days into the new semester and asked if we'd be interested in a weekend rotation. A few towns over, a children's crisis center was building a therapy program and wanted guidance from experienced teams. It wasn't paid, but it wasn't volunteer either. They'd cover gas, meals, and give Rusty a small allowance of treats and toys for his work. "Just a few hours every Saturday," Frank said. "Help them get started, ease into the routine." We said yes. The center was quiet and tucked behind a low fence lined with potted sunflowers. Inside, everything was soft: carpeted floors, beanbag chairs, gentle lighting. We met the director, Ms. Helen, a small woman with curly white hair and a voice that reminded me of lullabies. She showed us around, introduced us to staff, and explained the purpose of the space. "We're not here to fix anyone," she said. "We're here to hold space for healing." Rusty fits that perfectly. The kids came in small groups. Some were there because of trauma, others because their families were struggling. Most didn't talk much, but they all watched Rusty like he was a puzzle they were trying to figure out. One boy, whose name was Tyler, wouldn't step more than 5 feet into a room if someone was already inside. He'd stand in the doorway, fingers tapping his thighs, eyes darting from floor to ceiling. Rusty didn't approach him right away. He just made a habit of lying down exactly 6 feet from the door whenever Tyler came in. Never closer. Never farther. It took 3 weeks before Tyler crossed the threshold. He didn't say anything. Just walked in, sat next to Rusty, and stayed there for 20 silent minutes. Then he whispered, "Hi." We didn't press him. Rusty just blinked slowly and wagged his tail once. That night, Ms. Helen emailed Mom to say thank you. "Some of these moments look so small on the outside," she wrote, "but they're everything on the inside." The next weekend, we visited the center again. Tyler sat with Rusty the entire session. No one else needed to be in the room. Word spread quickly, like it always did. A few more facilities reached out, some for guidance, some just for a visit. Frank managed the requests, only passing on the ones he thought made sense for us. "Rusty's not just doing therapy," Frank said. "He's shaping how people understand what healing looks like." I didn't totally know what he meant, but I could feel it. Every place we went, something changed. And it wasn't flashy. It wasn't always dramatic. It was quiet, steady, like a thread stitching people back together one loop at a time. Back at school, things were normal in the most unusual way. I had homework again. I had math quizzes and history assignments and late nights spent staring at vocabulary lists. But in between it all, I still had Rusty. He'd meet me at the door every afternoon like clockwork, then follow me around the house as I tried to balance study time and his very specific version of playtime, which involved hiding the same ball under different pieces of furniture. One Thursday, I came home to find Walt sitting on the porch, sipping lemonade and throwing ice cubes to Rusty, who batted them across the wood like they were hockey pucks. "You know," Walt said, "I was talking to Frank earlier. There's a conference next month. Animal-assisted therapy, upstate. Big deal. Researchers, trainers, families. Frank's presenting. He wants you two to come." "A conference?" "Nothing fancy, just a few days. They've even got a teen panel this year. Stories from the field. He said you could speak if you're up for it." I wasn't sure I was. Public speaking wasn't exactly something I trained for. But Rusty looked up at me then, ice cube in his mouth, tail sweeping slowly back and forth. And I figured, if he could do what he did every day, the least I could do was talk about it. We agreed to go. The conference took place at a college campus nestled between thick trees and winding roads. We drove up with Frank and stayed in a little guest house off the main quad. Rusty got his own blanket and a bowl with his name on it, which he seemed to accept as proof that he belonged. There were hundreds of people there, vets, therapists, teachers, even a few scientists with clipboards and very serious expressions. But everyone smiled when they saw Rusty. The day of the teen panel, I was nervous. They gave us a table on stage with little name cards and microphones. There were 3 other kids, one who worked with a search and rescue collie in Colorado, another who trained therapy rabbits for nursing homes, and a girl from Maine whose lab had helped her brother recover from a car accident. When it was my turn, I cleared my throat and looked at the rows of seats. "I didn't know what Rusty would become," I said. "I just knew I needed him when we got him. What I didn't realize was that he needed a job. And what we found together, this work, these people, it's more than I ever thought possible. He listens. That's the whole thing. He listens with his whole self." There was a pause. Then applause. After the panel, people came up to ask questions, shake my hand, give Rusty little treats. One woman said she'd never seen a dog hold such gentle focus. Another asked if Rusty had ever had a formal psychology evaluation. "He doesn't need one," I said. "He reads hearts better than any book." Back at the guest house, Rusty lay on the porch, paws twitching in sleep. Walt sat beside him, whittling something I couldn't quite see. "You did good," Walt said without looking up. "He'd be proud." "Who?" He looked at me. "Your dad." It was the first time in a while he'd mentioned him. I nodded. "Yeah, I hope so." The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk around campus. Rusty walked beside me, leash loose in my hand. A few birds called out across the trees. The air smelled like wet leaves and cut grass. We passed a bench near the main hall. A man sat there, rubbing his eyes. "Bad night?" I asked. He looked up. "I'm not supposed to be here. My daughter's a student. I was visiting. I thought I could handle being here. Too many memories." Rusty walked up to him and rested his head on the man's knee. He froze, then began to cry. Not loud, not messy. Just quiet tears that slid down without fanfare. He didn't say thank you. Didn't need to. We kept walking. Later that day, we wrapped up our time at the conference and headed home. On the drive, Frank talked about future ideas, a regional workshop, maybe even a book. Mom smiled. "We're in, as long as Rusty wants to keep doing it." I looked in the back seat. Rusty was asleep, paw over his nose. "He'll tell us," I said. "He always does." School kept moving. Fall arrived in slow shifts, cool mornings, red leaves, jackets pulled from the back of closets. Rusty was busier than ever. More visits, more letters, more quiet moments where he somehow did the impossible just by being. But he didn't show off. Never had. That wasn't his way. He made the moment about the person, not himself. Like he knew he was just the connection, not the point, but the bridge. And every week, that bridge led someone back to themselves. One Saturday, we visited a boy named Henry. 8 years old, recently adopted, struggling with panic attacks. His parents were trying everything: therapy, books, toys, medication. Nothing helped. Until Rusty came in, sat down, and placed his paw gently on Henry's foot. Henry stopped shaking. He took a breath. And then another, and then said, "I think the dog likes me." It was the first thing he'd said out loud in over a month. The next visit, he read Rusty a whole chapter from a book. By Halloween, Rusty had been in 6 counties, 9 schools, 4 hospitals, and more homes than I could count. He'd done it all without ever learning a single word more than what he already knew. And somehow, that was enough. Maybe it always had been. The first real snow of the year fell 2 weeks before Christmas. It started slow, tiny flakes dancing in the porch light, then thickened until the street disappeared under a soft, white hush. Rusty sat by the front door, watching it all like he was remembering something. Maybe he was. The last time we'd had a snow this heavy, it was the day he saved me. Mom brought out the box of decorations that night. She handed me a coil of lights for the windows and passed Rusty his annual Christmas collar, a red one with a jingle bell that never actually jingled because he always managed to lose it within a day. He wore it anyway, tail wagging like he understood it meant something special. We spent the weekend decorating. Walt came by and helped hang the lights outside. Mom made hot cocoa, and Rusty sat at the center of everything, like always. When we finished, the house glowed warm against the cold. It felt full. Walt stayed late that night, sitting with me by the fire after Mom went to bed. Rusty lay between us, head on his paws, eyes half closed. "You ever think about what comes next?" Walt asked quietly. I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He leaned back, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "He's done so much. Been so much. But dogs don't stay forever." I didn't say anything, just stared at the fire. Rusty let out a small breath, a soft huff that drifted up like steam. "I think," Walt said, "when his time comes, he'll know. And he'll make sure you're ready." But I didn't want to be ready. The next few weeks passed in a blur of snow, school, and visits. Rusty still ran beside me on the trail, still curled up under the kitchen table while I did homework, still barked at the snowplow like it was an invading army. But something about him changed, not worse, just slower. He took his time getting up, slept a little longer in the mornings, spent more minutes watching the world instead of leaping into it. Frank noticed it too. "He's earned a break," he said during our last visit to the center before Christmas. "Maybe cut back a little. Not retire, but rest more. Let him set the pace." I agreed. Rusty wasn't stopping. He was just choosing when to move. Christmas morning came with clear skies and a blanket of untouched snow. I woke up to Rusty sitting by my bed, his collar gone, eyes bright. He leaned his head into my chest when I sat up and stayed there longer than usual. We opened gifts. Mom gave me a new winter coat. Walt carved me a wooden figure of Rusty, detailed down to the slight curve in his tail. It looked so real I almost expected it to breathe. Rusty got a new bed, a box of peanut butter bones, and his favorite, an old tennis ball that Walt found and wrapped in tissue paper just to make me laugh. We spent the whole day together. No visits, no calls. Just us. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the stars, Rusty came out and lay beside me. He didn't sit up, didn't wag, just leaned into my side and stayed still. I didn't know it then, but it would be the last night he sat outside with me like that. 3 mornings later, he didn't come when I called. I found him in his bed, breathing slow, calm. Mom sat beside me. Walt came over in minutes. We took him to the vet. Dr. Green checked him gently, quietly. "His heart's slowing," she said. "It's peaceful. He's not in pain. He's just tired." I sat on the floor and held him. He opened his eyes once, looked at me, and then he was gone. The days that followed didn't feel real. The house felt too big, too quiet. His bowls stayed in place for a week. His leash hung untouched by the door. Every step I took, I expected to hear his nails click on the floor behind me. Letters came, cards, notes from schools, centers, hospitals, people we didn't even know. They sent photos, drawings, bracelets, poems. One child wrote, "He was the best listener in the world." We held a gathering at the park, the same one where the fair had been. People showed up with their pets, with candles, with tears and laughter and stories. I spoke, though I didn't plan to. I thought Rusty came into my life to help me after I broke my leg, but that wasn't it. That was just the beginning. He helped people remember who they were, helped them feel safe, helped them speak when they had no words. He didn't need a language. He had presence, and that was enough. We scattered some of his ashes at the trail behind Walt's cabin. That was where he started his journey, and where he found Walt, and found help for me. I kept the wooden figure on my nightstand, and every time I looked at it, I remembered everything. Months passed. Spring returned. Snow melted. The days stretched longer again. One afternoon, Frank invited us to the center for a new trainee showcase. They had 5 new pups starting the program. I watched them fumble, bark, chase their own tails. One of them, smaller than the rest, with a crooked ear and the same golden fur that reminded me of sunlight, wandered over and plopped at my feet. Frank smiled. "She hasn't connected with anyone yet. Seems like she was waiting." I didn't say yes that day, but I came back the next week, and the one after. Eventually she started following me around like a shadow, just like Rusty used to. She didn't have his eyes or his calm, but she had something else, something new. We named her Maple, and we started again. Not to replace him, but to carry him forward. Because some dogs aren't just pets, they're stories. And Rusty's was one worth telling for the rest of my life. He was my miracle. And now, it was my turn to pass that miracle on.